to jump into our second New Testament course, and we have a small review. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I will endeavor to answer them. But what's really great is Martin, with your degree and with my almost degree, maybe we can make we have a better chance of answering those questions. So can I get a thumbs up if everybody can see this screen? Great.
Yep.
Thank you. Amazing. Okay, so just a review of the what we went over last week or 2 weeks ago rather. We spoke a lot about the New Testament, and this is just a continuation of the slides. So before I forget, let me just put this link in the chat, and if it's easier for you to access the link, um, on your own computer. There we go. And I'll just open the sharing preferences. So, great. So I think that everyone can see it now. Or
No.
actually, no?
No.
Okay.
We just see the link. Now we see
Yeah,
it.
now
Okay. Great. So then let me just copy and paste this because I know that this one will be better, just in case. So this is an updated link that should be able to give you access. Okay.
Make it bigger.
Make it bigger?
Yeah,
Awesome.
you had it bigger and then
You can pinch with your fingers, Susan, to make it larger. You can pinch the screen.
all
Yeah.
right.
Oh,
Oh,
no, that's too big.
That's too big. Yeah,
Uh,
we can all pinch it
let's
because we
see.
can make it larger.
Yeah, we can easily do that.
We can do that.
Okay.
No, on my computer I can.
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I have a
Okay,
volunteer
okay.
to just review what we went over last week? And if you'd like to just throw in anything you remember or that stuck out to you, you're welcome to as well. But does anybody want to read this slide?
I would read.
Thanks, Marilyn.
You're welcome, Becky. The four Gospels are not eyewitness accounts. They were written 35 to 65 years after Jesus' death, a gelling of separate oral traditions that had taken form in dispersed Christian communities. Jesus died in about the year AD 30. The Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke date to about 65 to 85 and have sources and themes in common. The Gospel of John was composed around 90 to 95 and is distinct. So when we read about Mary Magdalene in each of the Gospels, as when we read about Jesus, what we are getting is not history, but memory. Memory shaped by time, by shades of emphasis, and by efforts to make distinctive theological points.
Amazing. This might be cut off. And already, even at this early period, as it is evident when the varied accounts are measured against each other, the memory is blurred. So, this is just a little hint of what we're going to be focusing on today, which is the story of Mary Magdalene. Who's heard of Mary Magdalene before? Okay. Does anybody want to jump in and say what they know about Mary Magdalene?
Not-
You're supposed to be Jesus' mother.
Jesus's mother. Well, that's actually a different Mary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wrong information.
She was a
There-
prostitute. She was a prostitute. That's one of the main things about her, right? And
She was maybe a prostitute.
maybe a prostitute, and she was one of the, or I think she was the first one that he appeared to after he rose from the dead. Correct? Is that
That
correct?
is true. Yeah. So Mary of Magdalene is known for being the first person to see Jesus and to proclaim that he is risen from the dead. So that actually elevates her status. But so I want to go back to Sue, what you said, like it was his mother. There are actually many Marys in the New Testament, and we don't know much about them, but there's often almost like a gelling of all the Marys so that when we do learn something about Mary, such as Mary of Bethany, she was a prostitute, and we learn something about Mary, Jesus's mother, that she was very holy, that she believed in God and had kind of like an incredible faith. They've all been gelled together, and you'll see that in these slides we actually have a lot of art from not too far around from where I'm sitting, that different depictions of Mary and different depictions of our biblical, of really the biblical woman who we know and the stories that we hold with those women. And there's a certain gelling that happens with a lot of these stories. So it's actually very fitting that you would say Mary is Jesus's mother, or Mary, she was a prostitute, because there's a lot of ambiguity there. And I know that a lot of you have actually seen a lot of these paintings and traveled very extensively, and know that when we see a painting that just says Mary, we're not actually sure which one is being spoken about. And that is left intentionally ambiguous by a lot of the painters who were interpreting the Bible in a way that was simply their own personal interpretation. So it's interesting to kind of move through these biblical stories with a lot of the paintings that and artwork that actually have shaped our own contemporary understanding of the New Testament. So, women in the Old and New Testaments, who are the people we know? So, we've got Eve in the very beginning. We've got Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. We know those as our matriarchs who we actually dive into, we pray to every day. We have Miriam, Moses' sister, Ruth, Deborah, Hannah, Bathsheba, Jezebel. These are people who actually just came up, and when I was thinking about who are the most prominent women that I know, if I were to think of that in 10 seconds. Do you think that this, is there anyone you want to add to this list? We can certainly add people to this list.
Dana,
Who?
Dina,
Dina,
Tina, yes.
Dina.
Okay. Great. So then we have Dina, and then I put Esther and Vashti here. Why? Purim. Okay, great. So then, woman in the New Testament, we have Mary, mother of Jesus, often known as the Madonna. We have Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, who is Jesus's cousin. Martha, the anxious sister of Lazarus, who these are actually my own descriptions of how to remember these women, but she was one of the first people we hear of in actually offering hospitality to Jesus, inviting Jesus into her home. Mary of Bethany, she's the loving follower of Jesus, and she actually, so Dara, she is who we often think of as Mary, I would say, the prostitute who Jesus forgives. Not to say that Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. We just don't have sufficient evidence to prove that Dafka she was. And Mary of Magdalene, and she's actually portrayed as the unwavering disciple of Jesus. We're going to look at a few texts today from the New Testament, but before we do that, I want to just prime our minds for how we understand textual readings by looking at the story of Esther and Purim in the ways that we read about Esther and the ways that we read about Vashti. So we already have these tools because we already, these tools, what I mean by that is feminist critique, reading what the text says, biblical exegesis. And we do this actually every year during Purim or every Torah study. And so I'm hoping that we do this kind of as a way to prime ourselves before we look at some New Testament texts and artwork, so that we can see what the text might be telling us between the lines. Okay, so the book of Esther and women in the New Testament. So on the left, we have a picture of Vashti. And on the right, we have, it's a painting of Vashti. On the right, we have a painting of Esther. So Ernest Normand, 1890, is our painting for Vashti. And we have, does anybody speak French? Okay. La Toilette d'Esther by Theodore Chasseriau.
It doesn't look like she's going to the bathroom.
Right. So actually, what do you see here? You can jump in and say anything about either painting. And I'm actually going to take some notes over here so that we can compare what our first impressions are. No answer is a wrong answer. It's really just how does each painting strike you?
Becky,
Yes.
I actually would have thought they would have been opposite, that Esther would, just from my limited, really perspective of Esther and Vashti. So I don't know why. I just thought Esther would have been the woman on the left lounging. So, and Vashti, I thought in this perspective of, showcasing herself more so than Esther.
Ah, okay.
I can see that because I was also surprised to see that depiction of Esther, who we usually think of as a modest woman. And to have this picture, it's a little jarring.
Dean?
They both seem to be very aware of their beauty and sexuality.
Okay, and we have some different ways of showing that beauty and sexuality, right? So in the picture of Esther, we have someone who's explicitly naked, whereas where do you see that beauty in the painting of Vashti?
Well, she's depicted on a bed. That she seems to be very much into her thoughts.
Yes, and what about what's happening in the background of these photos, or actually in some case the foreground? What do we see aside from the actual biblical characters themselves in this painting of Vashti?
It's like a slave.
A slave to the right.
And they look like they're crying almost.
Crying, yeah. So someone feeling, perhaps a slave or a servant who's feeling the same, leaning emotionally towards Vashti in a similar way. Does Vashti look happy? What kind of emotions do you get from Vashti?
They're thinking, I think.
She looks very pensive. And from this painting of Esther, what do we have?
Well, it means that she is taking care of her, how she looks, just herself, taking care of her hair, face, body, and so on. This is what toilet means. It's not only in French, it's one language that I know very well. It can be used the same way. And this is what she is doing. And she is looking up and to the right. Apparently something is there while taking care of her hair and with somebody helping her. I don't know, on the right.
I think she looks contemplative. I think she looks contemplative there also, as Vashti does. I mean, we can't really tell she's looking out into the distance, whether it's idle, idle, dreaming, or just, perhaps contemplating her situation, that where she came from, and now she's surrounded by, surrounded with all this wealth and care that she didn't have before she fell into this place, this palace, this kingdom.
Great. And Dara, I saw your hand up.
Oh, I don't know. I've read somewhere that a lot of paintings the purpose is the titillation of the patron who commissioned it. And seems like this is a prime example of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a sense of, I have a professor right now who the first thing he makes us ask whenever we read anything in the Bible is who paid for it. As in who was the writer and where did this writer get the support. And that is definitely a huge, that plays a huge role in the way in which people are depicted. And at the same time, I think that these paintings in juxtaposition also show and pick up on a lot of different ways in which women have been depicted in biblical renderings, whether they're in our midrashic writings, when the rabbis write about different symbolic meaning of women or what's behind those stories. Like, for example, you will see that, Esther in a lot of ways is posed against Vashti. The Midrash does that, the rabbis do that for a very specific purpose, and the Bible also does that. And we see Esther with this very blonde, long hair, and in a mirror of Vashti, she instead has black hair, and you have the juxtaposition of something like pure versus impure, if that makes sense, which is definitely the sense that both of their shared husband would like to convey to people reading that story. I see Arlene, your hand is up.
Yeah, I with Esther, she looks a little pensive because Mordecai wanted her to ask I can't say his name, Ahasuerus, to tell him about Haman and what he's doing to the Jews, and maybe she's trying to get herself to look beautiful so that she can approach her husband, because prior to that, I guess he hadn't called her in a couple weeks or something. So that might be why she's looking this way.
Yeah. All of these there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, all of these come together to form a picture of how we understand the mind of the person depicting these biblical scenes and characters, and also the ways in which we've learned to depict them over time. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. Okay. So the book of Esther, how women are portrayed in text. We wrote down a few different reactions to those paintings, and now I actually would like to experience responding to the text and seeing what we get from reading the text, reading about these women and not seeing them. So from Esther 1:9-11, we learn about Vashti. In addition, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, the king was merry with wine. He ordered Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, Carcass, and 7 eunuchs in attendance on himself to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing a royal diadem, to display her beauty to the peoples and to the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. So, what do we know about Vashti from these 3 verses?
She's a beautiful woman.
Good. Vashti is beautiful.
Mhm.
What else might we know?
Maybe other people hadn't seen her. Perhaps she was being kept um, more hidden since she's being displayed. To, or maybe she's never seen with all her makeup and embellishment, only when the king decides to display her like a thing.
Yeah, exactly. So we know that she's not actually physically with the king. Um, we can maybe glean that perhaps she's not seen in public often. We know that the king essentially gets inebriated, and the power dynamic of their relationship exists such that he would be able to order her to come. That's kind of set almost as an expectation. Um, in this first line of verse 9, we read that Queen Vashti gave a banquet for women in the royal palace. What could that tell you? About perhaps her power.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
What's up, Cindy? Yeah, say it.
She has some control. She has some power to do things, that she can give a banquet that requires money, that requires having some authority.
Right. So Vashti comes from money. She comes from a lot of money. She's very wealthy. And when we read that she gives a banquet for women, when we read the history of this, we know that she gives this banquet because she comes from a very highly politically elevated family. So she does have some power.
I read this as very limited power.
Ah, Jean, say more.
She has power, I put it in quotes, to summon only women to a banquet, not men. She's valued for her beauty, and her power comes from her beauty, not from her intellect.
Amazing. Okay, great. Oh, sorry, Eugene?
I'm sorry, I missed a minute. Probably I had some issue with sound, but anyway, I hope I heard main things. At least I heard what Just Jean said. I also was thinking that she has power, and the fact that she gave banquet only for women, I think at that time woman, even at the highest position, could not give banquet for men. I think only men could do it. Therefore, it is the highest level that she could give it for women. And also, I don't know, those banquet, how long it did continue? Only a few hours or a few days? Because on the seventh day, whether the banquet was still, most likely it is still continued, because king was merry with wine. Maybe from that he also attended banquet, maybe without that. But anyway, he ordered 7 women to bring Vashti, that he could show her to everybody. I think it really shows her position first in the house, because he had other women, apparently other his wife or whoever they could be else, to do something for her. Therefore, I can say that she could be in the position of senior not from age, but from the position senior wife. This is
Great.
my opinion. And he was proud that she is so beautiful. It could mean his level in the overall society among those his courtiers and possibly other kings that could attend.
Great. Thank you, Eugene. So now so there are many ways essentially we've established that Vashti can have power, or exhibits that she might have power through her beauty, through her political standing from the family she comes from. And we could read that because of her ability to give a banquet for women. And essentially, if what does Vashti say when the king calls on her? Does she decide to come and present herself to her husband in public display?
She refuses.
No.
She refuses. And so what happens when she refuses?
He ditches her.
Yeah, bye bye Vashti. He cements a decree so that she never can enter the kingdom again. So it's actually a really hard, it's a deep fall for her asserting her opinion and asserting her own decision.
You know, you can go back to the painting that you showed us of Vashti, and one of the things that you can think she's contemplating is, will she go to the king? Because she seems to be deep in thought.
She
Right.
does seem to be
I've been
deep in thought.
summoned, should I go?
Right. We can also ask
And-
ourselves if
And
if
the slave seems to be very, very sad, because his status is derived through Vashti. And if she decides not to go, what is his status?
right.
You know,
So
so there's,
that slave is actually a female slave. But
Really?
oh yeah,
so some people, like critics of this painting, suggest that the slave already in a period of mourning suggests that this is right after Vashti has made her decision.
Mm.
She's in a period of waiting, if that makes sense, because the king, there is a time right after this when the king does decide what he's going to do, because he says, well, she said no, I can't just accept this. Otherwise, then all the wives in the kingdom will say no to their husbands and think it's okay. And so this is like the time in limbo when, because she's still surrounded by all of her wealth, you could see in the foreground and in the background, that they're just awaiting what's going to happen to them. But I completely agree with you. We, just by kind of reading about Vashti, we learn about the jumps we can make, what we can maybe understand about these texts without things being stated explicitly. And with the help of other interpretations from time in art and art history, like Jean, what you did in terms of applying that interpretation to the painting also really illuminates what we can gain from the text as well.
Becky,
Yeah.
not having ever studied and not knowing very much about the New Testament, I didn't realize that the book of Esther was in the New Testament. And I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah,
just looking at it
great.
since it says women in the New Testament, and I thought that that's what that meant. So I wondered why Christians don't celebrate Purim.
Okay, so I just got very excited by your question, and that's why I was like, I apologize for interrupting it. This is just very exciting. Actually, that was a typo on my part. Women are not in, I was just using this actually as a frame through which we could look at women in the New Testament by looking at the ways in which we as Jews normally understand women in the Old Testament. But you bring up a great point, because actually the Christian Bible is not complete without the Old Testament. It's actually a foundational and theological requisite for the New Testament to even make any sense, for the work and life of Jesus to make any sense from a theological perspective. So the question of why why don't Christians celebrate Purim, I think, is a really valid question. It's also one I can't really answer, because there are some communities that do Christian communities that really uphold the holiday and the Jewish life cycle calendar that we have from the Old Testament. For instance, they will have a Passover, if that makes sense. They will observe Passover because they see that not only as part of their biblical teachings, because they read the Old Testament for the New Testament to make sense, but also because the Passover meal was so important to the life and narrative of Jesus Christ. So they have a Passover Seder, but it just takes on different meaning for them. And because Christianity denominationally is so nuanced and varied, I'm sure that, or I would be very confident that we find communities that celebrate many what we call Jewish holidays as rituals that they use to make full, or almost like see in full vision, their view of Christianity. I will say that personally, and I speak in the I, attending a Christian seminary for my master's in religion, the New Testament obviously trumps the Old Testament in the core of study. And there are things that we focus on in, I went to an Episcopal seminary, Yale Divinity School. The things that we focus on when we study New Testament are really limited to the historical, placing those verses in historical context and understanding why people might be performing certain rituals, with a goal of understanding what Jesus gets so angry about in the New Testament, why he's proposing new rituals. Does that make sense?
A little.
Okay.
So Jesus was technically a Reform rabbi.
Reconstructionist.
I didn't say anything. Women in the New Testament. So just to give a small overview, a quick overview of what this, what women in general, what we can glean from women in the New Testament. These are a few. Would anybody actually like to read these verses from Galatians, Corinthians, and Ephesians?
I guess I'll read because I'm going to have to leave soon because I've got to start teaching soon. So there is neither male nor female, for all of you are one in Jesus Christ. I think that's an interesting, if I've been watching the news properly, that it's an interesting topic that needs to be published to certain members of Congress.
Can you read the
Yes, I'll read the second one and the third one too. However, in the Lord, neither is woman independent of man, nor is man independent of women. For as the women originated from man, so also the man has his birth through the woman. And all things originate from God. That's very deep and meaningful. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church.
Thoughts, reactions? Thank you for reading, Martin.
Oh, you're welcome. You like my dramatic reading?
I do.
Well, the last one is quoted all the time by the Christian fundamentalists, it's the reason why women should be kept in their place. I mean, there's a lot to contradict it, however, in the New Testament, right? I think, including the two things you just read.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I would argue that it's actually putting these together. It's not like I intended to confuse you, but I just wanted to mix it up a little. But yeah, it's hard to read these in succession. Any other thoughts?
Well, it seems to me that in the Old Testament, there are a lot of contradictions too. And, which is why you find when people want to make arguments for their point of view, there's always plenty of fodder in the Bibles, whether in Old or New Testament, now I see, because you can basically find anything to back up anything that you feel, because there's so many different angles that are discussed. So to me, it's no different looking at this in the New Testament, same kind of thing. So I guess it's maybe it's put out there so that you can consider each of these different points of view.
I have another.
Yeah, sure.
But I think it's interesting that these are the writings of St. Paul, right? They're not sayings attributed to Jesus.
No, they're not.
So I don't know. I just think that's interesting. I think if you look at like in the Gospels, these sayings attributed to Jesus, I don't think you find this kind of thing. I think there's more of this sense of, the forgiveness of, he who is without sin, throw the first stone at her. The defense of women, the idea that when they're divorced, everybody's just an angel in heaven and nobody takes anybody else, as a wife. So anyway, I don't know. I just wanted to remark that of the source, like you said, who paid for it. So the source here is not Jesus. It's Jesus's salesman, basically. And who was he writing to? I mean,
And it's the audience as well.
That would sell very well with the Ephesians.
Right. We're also, though, I mean, the sayings of Jesus, we also kind of have to take the same approach to a certain extent to the synoptics as well, because they're portrayed as the sayings of Jesus, but they're not, Jesus is not actually
No, I
right.
know.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So, in terms of the synoptics, Dara, you make an incredible point, because we actually can ground them more in evidence and proof than we can some of the other writings in the Christian canon. So there is this. So let's think, like, who paid for it, right? And well, my professor, Dr. Cohen, would be so happy. And we also have to think. Let's say you're reading these writings or you're hearing them preach to you. What are you thinking when you're hearing these writings? So when we think about you as a woman listening to these new teachings that have never been taught before or even uttered in your community, perhaps in a community square, we're also we have to remember that at the very beginning, church communities were not actually solidified, right? So the formation of the church was not actually in completion. What does it mean to hear there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus? Eugene?
No, here, I think it is just stepping away from difference between those two sexes that we know, men and women, that they're all like children of God. They're all from God. It is just, some kind of, I can call it a little bit abstraction, despite it is not really abstraction. It's just stepping away from some differences, but all are humans, doesn't matter men or women, and therefore I don't see here something that we heard about, that members of Congress should hear that and so on. I don't see here directly relations to this, despite I understand that I also was thinking about today's life, but I think main thing is not that. Main thing is all are people, all are humans, all are related to Jesus Christ the same way. This is what they mean. Also, I want to say that among those three different statements, I don't see contradiction.
Oh, okay, great. So actually, that's a great point to leave on. So thank you, Eugene. So you pulled on something that is actually really important to Christian theology in this first and second quote, in these two verses. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ. And however, in the Lord, neither is woman independent of man or man independent of woman. For as the woman originated from the man, so also the man has his birth through the woman. And all things originate from God. These are fundamental principles in Christianity because essentially, in Christian theology, gender does not matter because every human being can see themselves in the life of Jesus Christ, in the life and body of Jesus Christ. Marilyn, you're muted.
Yeah. The first thought of neither male or female, for me, I perceive it, and then the follow-up second statement seems to be an equality between the male and female. And then that third statement, relegates the woman, but you're not equal because now you have to be submissive. I mean, that's how I see it. So, one is not above the other, but the third statement's assuring you that you have to be submissive, as I see it.
Yeah, so we're just gonna move on very quickly. I brought these verses into the conversation in particular because they're often used in kind of contra-feminist arguments to establish that Christianity in general is a religion that espouses equality between women and men, stam, like period. But then as we see in our last verse, we have contradictory statements like we do in the Old Testament, or for us, our Hebrew Bible, all the time. So that's not necessarily a cut and dry answer, but in most academic writings, to at least make an argument for expanded equality between men and women in the New Testament, and in the development of Christianity and Christian thought, these are two very prominent verses that surface. Okay, so from Romans 16, we have the verse, I commend to you Sister Phoebe, who is a deacon of the church which is at Cenchrea, that you receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints, and that you help her in whatever manner she may need have of you. For herself, she has also been a helper of many, and myself as well. So, does anybody know who wrote Romans?
Yeah, aren't they all letters that Paul, aren't they all by Paul? Aren't they all ascribed to Paul? Or some of them not?
Most of them are ascribed to Paul.
Romans
So are you talking about Romans in general? Like all of Romans are ascribed to Paul, but not all the letters in the
but
canon.
not all the letters.
Yeah. So so Paul wrote this. And what can you glean from this? He's saying, I commend to you Sister Phoebe. Who is Phoebe?
Well, it says she's a deacon of the church.
Yeah, so she's a deacon.
Unusual. So she's a minister. She's has a holy place.
Yeah, she's a leader in the church. What else do we know? What can we glean from her about her importance to Paul?
Well, she's helped him personally in some way.
Okay, so she's helped him. And not just him, but who else?
Many.
Many. And how should we treat her?
Like a saint.
Like a saint. Paul is no easy man to please. I'm just going to put that out there. He names 5 different deacons or teachers within Romans who he believes are worthy of saintly praise. And there's one of them is Phoebe. The first one he names is himself. So there's a this is actually not it's not something we can easily overlook, especially because to be a deacon of the church is no small feat, especially for a woman. And to be worthy of a saint in the sense that she is in some way closer to that image and experience of martyrdom or crucifixion on behalf of her people, kind of it not kind of it just demonstrates her status. We don't really know anything about Phoebe. We assume that she is a businesswoman. But then we learn about Mary shortly after. Greet Mary, who has worked hard for you. So, what do we know about this Mary? We don't know which Mary she is, but we know that she has worked hard for Christians. So now we're just going to go over by like 5 minutes, but if you have to go, you can go.
I was going to say, I have to go. So thank you. Thank you very much. Nice seeing everybody.
Bye-bye, take care.
So Mary Magdalene, she's been depicted in art that's actually housed all over the world. And like we mentioned earlier, part of the reason why she has been depicted at length is because she's been merged with all of the other Marys that are mentioned in the Bible, in the New Testament. And we have a mezcla, a mixing of those portrayals when we look particularly at art and painting post 1400s. So just going to move here. Who was she? So from the New Testament, we can conclude that Mary of Magdala, that was her hometown, which was a village on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, was a leading figure among those attracted to Jesus. When men in that company, as in his disciples, abandoned him at the hour of mortal danger, which is when he was being crucified, Mary of Magdala was one of the women who stayed with him even to the crucifixion. So there are very famous images of her and Jesus and her kneeling at literally the cross because she did not abandon Jesus like some of his disciples. She was present at the tomb, the first person to whom Jesus appeared after his resurrection. I think, Dara, you had mentioned this. And one of the first people to preach the good news, which we know is gospel in Greek, of that miracle. Okay, so I'm just going to read this for the sake of time. In Luke 8, 2-3, we meet Mary. Soon afterwards, Jesus, he went on through the cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom to God. The 12 were with him, his disciples, and as well, there were some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary, called Magdalene, from who 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward Chuza, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their resources. So,
What does that mean?
sorry? Oh.
What is the 7 demons that got out of Mary?
Yeah, so actually this Dara, this points to what you were saying before when we some people say that the 7 demons represent that Mary of Magdalene was a prostitute or an adulteress or in some ways sexually deviant. And a lot of New Testament scholars actually say that the writers of this, so Luke, actually was just accustomed to writing in a Jewish way. And 7 is a very Jewish number because it's a round number. And so 7 doesn't really mean anything. It could actually be indicative of ways to show a power dynamic, so that she had 7 demons that had gone out. Well, these were 7 ways in which Jesus had power over her. That's actually not a very popular hypothesis, because it's contra to what we had read earlier, if that makes sense, that all men and women are equal. But that's just one hypothesis that has flown around. What we do know is that something was wrong with her. She was perceived to be as somewhat impure, and Jesus healed her. What else do we know about her? So it says that all of these women were with them, who provided for them out of their resources. What do you think that could mean? I'm just gonna say also, you could look at the painting next to this, and just what do you think, what sense do you get from Mary Magdalene? Is she wealthy? What color is she wearing? What could that say about her? What color is her hair?
Was she a scarlet woman?
Right. So we definitely believe that, I forget who. We definitely, or at least the painter, who was, give me a second, Andrea Solari from 1524, perceived her as a scarlet woman, right? So like perceived those 7 demons as perhaps, evidence of her being a prostitute. But I would want to say, I mean, what about the value of her clothing? And how does she look? Does she look like she's someone of resources?
Yes.
Or
Yeah, she does.
yes, her clothing is actually gorgeous. I mean, you have velvet, you have a printed pattern, which would also indicate wealth, and then you have a very sheer cotton underneath. And you could also see that there are indicators of maybe that titillating kind of sensation that Solari might have wanted to provoke for the person who is viewing this by her showing her hair in this way. So her hair is down and long. She's definitely portrayed as somewhat of a sexual figure here, but also someone of great wealth. And we know that because
There's resources.
resources.
These women actually were supporting the male apostles.
Who
and
paid for
Jesus.
it? Mary, right? So that actually, now that you know that, what is that? Does that change anything in terms of the 3 verses we read about women before? What does that teach us about Jesus's ministry, and what does that teach us about the power of women in the New Testament? And another question that I'm not asking you to answer these questions, but another question that I just want to put out there is, in what ways do we see similar renderings of women and feminine power in the Old Testament, in our Hebrew Bible? Elaine, is that your hand? Oh, okay. Okay. So, in what ways do we see this in our own text, and what has that taught us before? Sorry. Okay.
Oil, is that oil? It says here that it's anointing oil that she's pouring. Is this the one that bathed his feet or something?
Yes.
Different
Mhm.
Mary, but that was Mary of Bethany, who we
Oh,
know.
that's Mary Bethany. Okay.
Yeah, this is anointing oil. So the ways in which we can, the way Mary Magdalene is often portrayed in artwork with this oil, because she anointed Christ. It, she's seen as almost like a true disciple because she anointed Christ, even when his male disciples had abandoned him. Cindy?
Yeah, I think they're saying that a lot of what the Bible is about would not have happened if not for the women.
Mhm.
I'm
I mean,
inclined.
we've got Miriam saving Moses as a baby, and here the women are supporting the disciples and Jesus. Would they have been able to go around preaching if the women hadn't been with them?
You know,
Yeah.
this reminds me of something I was reading about Israel, which it's true, I think, in the Orthodox communities now that the men study Torah all day and the women
Right, and the
work to
women,
support
the women make the money and the men
them.
pray.
Things
Right.
haven't changed.
What's interesting, no, that's really, this is great. So what's so interesting too is that's a very big message to give to society. And we can see the ways in which society responds to that message through the artwork that it produces. Clearly, Solari might not have been actually at home feeling 100% comfortable with that message. Like, yes, maybe this woman supported Jesus, but she only supported Jesus because she was a prostitute and that's how she made all her money, right? We have no evidence that Mary of Magdalene was a prostitute. The only thing that we can learn is
She had money.
that she had 7 evil spirits and infirmities. So that's actually a big leap to take when we're understanding the ways in which this has been portrayed in art, but also the ways in which Mary Magdalene has been depicted over and over and over again throughout the centuries. Because from a literal reading, to be the person who first encounters Jesus at the tomb when he rises, that's a big deal. It's not one of his disciples who does that. It's Mary of Magdalene. To have a woman have that responsibility, but also that fate, that speaks loads about who is writing this text and what they're trying to convey. Now, the way in which that's taken over history and molded, that's a different story. But a lot of Christianity and a lot of any religion, in terms of the way it's evolved culturally, has to be studied not only in text, but in the ways in which people have also made their contributions and reactions to that. So, sorry, Dara, yeah?
No, I said that the passage is so beautiful. You haven't read it, but the one you put on the
Oh,
screen.
yes. Well, I just want to be mindful of your time. So I want to end before the quarter after, but I'll stay after for people who would like to read this together. I'm just going to end very quickly on Jesus and women in general. And this is where we get Mary of Bethany, the washing of the feet, because we have essentially Simon, one of Jesus's apostles, really criticizing women for their harlotry. And Jesus says, he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet." That's the perfume on the feet is also another reason why the Marys sometimes get confused because it's not just one Mary who anointed him, but it's multiple Marys who anointed him. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven as her great love has shown, but whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests begin to say, not among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? And Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you, and go in peace. And we know that Luke actually focuses a lot on socioeconomic status, right? So it doesn't matter how much money you have, but your faith will bring you closer to God. And that's definitely being riffed on here. And this is one of Vermeer's most famous paintings with Mary of Bethany at his feet. And actually next to him is Martha, who invites Jesus into her home. So, any questions? Thanks for those who stayed. I'll stay about for an extra like 10 minutes for any questions, or if anybody would like to read together the empty tomb and just talk about woman in the New Testament, since we are in a time of Purim right now and learning about women in the Old Testament. Yes, Marilyn.
And I know, I don't know much about the New Testament, but I know that the little bit that I know that Jesus, the faith, forgiving sins. Was this the first time that he ever forgave a sin, and then that we know of with his ability? Or were there earlier passages in his?
I'm not positive. I'm inclined to say that there were earlier. I'm just gonna stop share so I can see everyone. Okay. Hi. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, no, just Shabbat Shalom. So in Matthew and in Mark, which are the two gospels that come before Luke, there are definitely instances of Jesus for forgiving sins. But what we learned last 2 weeks ago was we're not quite sure, right, of the specific dating of certain passages. So chronologically, I can't be sure of that answer. But Jesus definitely forgives sins with the explicit wording, forgiving sins, in the other gospels and letters.
So it seems that forgiving sins was like a kind of heresy to the rabbis at the time, that anybody should undertake to do that, a human being. Is that right? I mean,
Yeah. Do you want to speak more about that, Dara?
well, I mean, but from that passage you put up, I mean, does anybody in the Old Testament, any, Jewish prophet forgive sins? I don't think so. I think that that's supposed to be the province of God, right?
Right. And well, also, at the same time the New Testament is being written and codified, what else is being written and codified during this time?
the Old Testament.
The Septuagint, the Old Testament, right?
The Old Testament.
Oh, and Midrash, right?
Midrash.
The rabbinic writings, interpretation of the Old Testament, and actually the rabbis' reactions to the New Testament, to those teachings that are being dispersed throughout the land. Yeah, it's interesting on many levels, right? Because how do we actually repent in Judaism?
With good deeds.
Right. Sorry, Jean.
Charity.
Well, yeah, and tshuva,
Their ways. Tshuva.
right? Tshuva, like every year we, heshbon nefesh. And Jean?
Yeah, I was going to pick up on that theme also of forgiveness, because there's no Jewish theological basis for Jesus to have done that. And my thinking has always been that Jesus at most was a rabbi, so that he would not have forgiven, that this forgiveness comes later by, I don't know who wrote that. Was it Paul?
That was Luke.
Whoever wrote that part of the gospel attributed that to Jesus, but Jesus, it's inconceivable that Jesus would have done that as a Jew.
Ah, well,
In the same way that Jesus never proclaimed himself as the Messiah, but he was proclaimed as the Messiah.
Yeah.
so was
But
Jesus,
weren't there like messy, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, sorry.
No,
So-
weren't there kind of contemporaneous messianic pretenders to messiahhood at the time? So was
Yeah.
this
There were
sort of in
others,
the
yeah.
air, this
Well,
forgiveness of sins and
that's what our midrashic writers, the rabbis, are warning against. They're saying this guy who's walking around, like these writings, they're saying that the Messiah is Jesus, but this is not the real Messiah. And so we have to be careful because it's not just Jesus, right? I mean, his writings take on really unprecedented popularity, and that's what becomes Christianity. But there are other people, I would say, like even prominent Jewish rabbis who believe themselves were the Messiah. And people have to warn, the rabbis they write back and forth to different communities, warning each other of these imposters. They call them imposters. And so we have that on one level. When it comes to, Jean, your question about Jesus thinking that he could forgive someone's sins, I would say theologically, one step towards answering that question is trying to untangle whether Jesus viewed himself as Jewish.
he does. I mean, doesn't he say, I've come to fulfill the law? I've not come to change law, I've come to fulfill the law. I mean, he's
Well, he
very
also-
much a Jew.
Well, right, but at the moment of his crucifixion,
Yeah.
And his rise.
he's not necessarily Jewish anymore. I don't know.
He's-
I personally don't know what he is, but I know that the crucifixion is a seminal moment that really alters his personal theology.
Why? Could you tell us why?
Because that is the moment when he surrenders and also says, I will repent for all of your sins, like all
Uh-huh.
you people,
Okay.
and I am the Son of God,
But,
and I am God.
but again, this is something that is attributed to him. If he were Jewish, it's inconceivable that he would have said something like that. So these are the apostles later creating a
Yes.
church
Yeah.
and saying, this is what Christ said.
Mhm.
But as a Jew, it's just inconceivable that he would have said that. Did he ever, he never proclaimed himself to be divine. He never proclaimed himself to be the Son of God. That came later.
That's actually not,
Right.
well, it depends on what canon you're looking at. There are writings that show that Jesus, they're just not within
No, but what I'm saying
denominational-
is that's what the apostles said he said, but
Right.
it's inconceivable that a Jew would have said that.
I'm not actually quite sure I agree with you, and I'm okay like not agreeing with you, but I just want to put forth, what about the reform movement? At one point, it was inconceivable that a Jew would say, I will eat pork. And the paper platform came along, and then from that came the HUC Reform Banquet, which was actually, I mean, it's very well known amongst HUC students because it was called the Trafe Banquet, where only Trafe things were served. So I think that there's actually some room to say that. I'm not quite sure to say if he were a Jew during that time, it's inconceivable he would think that. I think actually overlooks the conflict that the different factions of Jews, the Pharisees, the Essenes, the Zealots had with one another, because they had theologies and rituals that varied very deeply from, they were very, very dissimilar from one another.
Nobody even knows, I mean, if he even existed, or, I mean, as Gina seems to.
No, well,
is
there's
there-
historical evidence.
Is there
that-
actual historical
I mean,
Rabbi Segal said there was nothing. In one class he gave, there was no historical, but whether there was or not, I mean, even if he did exist, we don't know what he said versus what his disciples said about him. I mean, it's a mixture of, what do you call it, a mezcla?
Well, Dara, our own particular Old Testament, I mean, who's to claim any
Exactly.
reality?
You're right, of
It's
course.
the writer of the text and how they evolve through time.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we have Midrash, right, Becky, that evolves. I don't know, do
Interpretive.
the Christian movements have a form of Midrash that
yeah,
explore-
they do.
Yeah.
Theologians come and make sense of, I mean, Midrash also, Midrash is also complicated because it's the rabbis trying to make sense of things in the Bible that inherently don't make sense. So they create stories that give logic to phenomena that they perceive as illogical or imperceivable. And so there's a lot of unknown when we're looking at these things. Like, do we know that Moses existed?
No evidence.
No,
No
and so,
evidence.
No
um,
evidence.
They'll get DNA evidence one of these days.
I mean, yeah. Sorry, Cindy.
Before my husband converted to Judaism, he determined that he had to prove the existence of Moses. And the books that he bought, the readings he did, he really analyzed it. And yeah, he could have proved the existence of Jesus Christ very easily, but not the existence of Moses. His final conclusion was he could not prove that Moses existed. He could not prove that there was a division of the Red Sea. None of that.
Yeah.
And I had to say to him, you just have to believe.
It almost doesn't matter whether Moses existed or not, whether there was a physical person of Moses.
We're not fundamentalists. We don't have to believe it's
Right.
all true.
Right.
I mean, that's-
Right. Well, I wonder, I mean, does it matter if Jesus existed or not, or it doesn't matter? In that sense, that's where I find it a little hard to accept the argument about these writings being written about Jesus, because like a lot of writings were being written about Moses, for instance, right? And we have redactors who came in and actually changed and removed whole parts of our Torah and Tanakh that we can't attribute knowing exactly where they came from. So like I just want to challenge you. Is this really hard to believe because it's not a belief that you grew up having? Or is this really hard to believe because the theology to you or the history to you is just really irreconcilable? Because as someone who grew up in an interfaith home, believing in the story of the New Testament is honestly the same to me as believing in the story of Torah and Tanakh.
I don't understand what you mean by that. Do you mean that they're both have the
think they're
character of
both-
myth or storytelling, or that they're both literally true? I don't.
No, I think that they're both in a context of storytelling. And I think that their reactions and narratives that are products of their time. And I believe that even more so after going to rabbinical school, having to read different contemporary narratives, like even the story of Gilgamesh, that mirror what we read in the Bible, like in the Tanakh, word for word, or like scene for scene, rather.
Can I say one thing? I mean, I think as Jews, we could be Jews we could be believers or whatever we want to call ourselves without believing that Moses existed or there was an Exodus or all that stuff. It's storytelling. It's part of our founding myth. But I think for a Christian, and I might be projecting something, if you actually hold the belief that Jesus was your personal savior,
Mm-hmm.
was born and died to forgive your sin, how could you believe that without believing this was a person that actually existed? Is it possible? I mean, you could be another kind of Christian, but
Well, I don't think
that's my
actually
question.
Yeah, I don't think that's actually a conflict though, because we have proof that Jesus existed. There is historical
Okay.
evidence that Jesus existed, right?
But suppose there wasn't any.
If
Suppose
there
there
was
didn't
any.
exist. Oh, but you say there is. Okay, all right. But that doesn't mean that he actually, died and came to life again.
No, we have
All
no
those-
proof. I can't speak to having proof and evidence for that.
Yeah, but I mean, or that he was, he was sent by God to, cleanse the world of its sin. I mean, even if he was some sort of historical person.
You're
But
not
can
going
you believe, can you believe that those things are myth and still believe in Christianity? That's I guess, do you understand what I'm asking?
Um, yes. So I guess like Jesus walking on water. You want to take that as an example? Arlene, go for it.
Yeah, it's the dying and being
yeah.
reborn that to me is.
Colleen, you're muted.
Um, I think that there are some parts of New Testament, like any biblical writing, that we can interpret as symbol and metaphor. Um, but that is also at the discretion of a lot of like we as people who live in by Maryland, and we're going to close this actually in a minute. So we as people who live in the year 2021 have interpreted a deep foundation of biblical writings that have evolved before us. It's almost impossible to kind of untangle them and go back to the original text and not impose our own understanding, at least from my point of view, is that in 32 years, my age, 32 years of learning from X, Y, Z, outside, inside my home, at church and not at church, I can't really unlearn all of that. And I think that the idea that Jesus symbolizes and Jesus's life could symbolize something that merely symbolizes a faith in resurrection and a faith in heaven and a guide for which one lives life on earth without there being a historical Jesus. I actually don't think that that's, for me, I don't perceive that as very foreign. And I think also, my understanding of what happened in some ways, in some ways, I want to say, obviously, I believed Moses existed, right? But in other ways, I have no evidence that Moses did everything that is portrayed to us. So I'm happy to actually leave this Zoom room open. Eugene, I see your hand up, but it's actually we're way over time for this class. If you do want to continue this conversation, we can continue as always. Here's my email address. And you have the slides if you'd like to read. They also have my my personal notes. And I will see you tonight at services. I want to thank you for a wonderful class. And those of you who still have your hands up, if you'd like to be in touch, please send me an email. I'd love to speak with you more about this.
Thank you so much, Becky. You did a
Thank
beautiful
you. I wish
job.
you'd do part 3. I wish you would continue because it's really interesting.
It's really very, very good. And what I wanted to say could be said on some other day. I hope we will have more meetings like this.